Why don't we go ahead and start? We have a pretty full agenda. And Seth, can we have a roll call, please?
Dick Whitnell.
Here.
Pam Curtis. Ron Saxton.
Here.
Hannah Vendering.
Here.
Duncan Weiss.
Here.
Okay, then let's go around the room and introduce ourselves, please. Start over there.
David Williams, Portland Public Schools.
Seth Allen, Oregon Education Investment Board staff.
Morgan Allen, no relation to Seth. Oregon School Boards Association.
Doug Wilson, Legislative Fiscal Office.
Elizabeth Brand, Community Colleges and Workforce Development.
Jessica Howard, Campus President, Southeast Extended Learning Campus of PCC.
Andrea Henderson, Executive Director, OCCA.
Frank Goulard, Higher Education Coordinating Commission member and Mathematics faculty at Portland Community College.
Mark Lowe's, Director of STEM for the Oregon Education Investment Board.
Dick Moody with ACT.
Betsy Hammond with the Oregonians.
Brian Fox, University Finance and Tax.
Mark Martinez, Oregon Department of Education.
Kylie Grano, Software Project.
Toya Craig, Save the Children.
Mr. Bueno, College Possible.
John Timms, Oregon Department of Education.
Helga Rosselli, Oregon Education Investment Board.
Dave Porter, Dual Language Immersion Advocate.
Ben Cannon, HAC.
Nancy Golden, Chief Education Officer for the Oregon Education Investment Board.
Whitney Grubbs, OEIB.
Lindsay Capps, OEIB.
Thank you. Those on the phone there, we'd like to introduce yourselves, please.
Denise Callahan, Ford Family Foundation.
Okay. Anyone?
Kay Fullerton, Eugene School District, 4J.
Anybody else there?
I'm Peter,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Peter Tromba, OEIB.
Okay.
Rhonda Nelson, Early Learning Division.
And Dania at the end there.
Danny Ledesma with the Governor's Office.
Okay, great. Okay, today we have a full agenda. We're going to try to hold our, not try to, we will hold our presenters to 30 minutes and then give us some room at the end, of course, for public testimony, which would be at three minutes. So up the bat first is Ben Cannon. Ben, please.
Well, thanks, Chair Whitnell and members of the committee. For the record, Ben Cannon, Executive Director, Higher Education Coordinating Commission. Hopefully you received the materials in advance, the responses to the subcommittee's questions, and the presentation that I'll go through pretty quickly today, hoping to leave ample time for questions, comments, discussion. You may also want to interrupt me along the way, that's fine, but it counts against your time, not mine.
Very good.
So just to sort of tee this up, well, first let me just introduce a couple of folks who you know or just met. Two commission members out of our 14-member HEC, Frank Goulard, who sits behind me, and who, as he said, is on the math faculty at PCC, a great member of the HEC, and then Duncan Weiss on this committee is our crossover member between the HEC and the OEIB Subcommittee on Outcomes and Investment. I also want to acknowledge a few staff, Elizabeth Cox-Brand at CCWD for another day before she moves on to OCCA, and then Brian Fox, who introduced himself, and I expect we'll see Dana Richardson, or maybe she joined by phone, but she's our Legislative and Policy Director. I'm not going to spend any time on what the HEC is. We've covered that at OEIB before, but I am going to provide just a little bit of context on the goal and the HEC's role in it. And so this slide attempts to depict sort of where we stand today in terms of production of degrees and certificates that are counted by the sort of so-called upper 40 and the middle 40, and it attempts in a very rough way to show what we would need to be producing in the year 2025 to meet our goal. I'll just note a couple of things about this slide. The top half tries to depict sort of a pipeline goal. So it really focuses on young adults and says we're producing about 10,500 bachelor's degrees to Oregon resident young adults currently per year. That would need to increase to 13,000 to be satisfying the 40% goal. The lower half focuses on the middle 40 and the total adult population. And basically at the level of production that's described here for the year 2025, we would over time, within a sort of reasonable period of time, our entire adult population would reflect this 40-40-20 or the middle 40 goal that we've set. I'll also note before moving on, we associate this upper 40 goal with our universities. That's how it's depicted here, and the middle 40 goal with our community colleges, also our privates, and this all assumes that private higher education continues and increases its level of degree and certificate production proportionally. But we tend to think 4 years on the top and 2 years on the bottom, and I just want to, having spent a lot of time over the last few weeks looking at the data, it's a much more complicated story than that. The community colleges in particular are a hugely important part of this upper 40 goal. In fact, the majority of students who reflected in this 10,500 number from 2013 did not begin at the four-year university from where they graduated. A whole bunch of them began at Oregon community colleges. So I just think that's a reminder we're sort of keeping in mind. All right, so your questions to our commission had to do with the 15-17 budget, and our highest priority strategies are sort of points of focus for our 2015-17 budget recommendation to you and to the governor. We've organized these around two kind of topic areas, if you will. And one is the idea that to reach 40-40-20, we have to improve the sort of productivity of our higher education system. The other that I'll address is an affordability recommendation and an affordability investment. So let me start with productivity. And before I say anything specifically about the strategy, I do want to kind of caveat the use of that word productivity. Maybe I should put it in quotation marks or air quotes. Oregon does comparatively well in terms of the productivity of its higher education system, especially its public universities. When you look at their output per state dollar, they do actually very well we do very well relative to other states in the country. So I don't want to present this as if it's a black mark on our colleges and our universities, because in fact we do relatively well, and we have data on that if you're interested. At the same time, I think these completion rates for bachelor's degrees, and then in the lower two parts, associate's degrees and certificates, suggest we can do quite a bit better. I want to again, you can spend all day caveating data, right? I don't want to do that. But I will note that these community college completion rates, these are troublesome. The data that results in these numbers is imprecise and incomplete, and this reflects only a certain portion of the community college student population, and likely underrepresents the effectiveness that community colleges have, or the productivity that community colleges have serving their students, and we're working on better data. But the bottom line is, regardless of how you cut it, we are producing completions at a significantly lower rate than we will need to be in order to achieve 40-40-20. And there are gaps, significant gaps between our white and Asian student completion rates and underrepresented students.
Are we in the range for other states, or above or below, or how do we compare?
In these completion rates, we're in the range. In both cases, we are somewhere in the middle. We can provide sort of follow-up on that.
The question I keep asking is why? And the data that I see shows it's more about the affordability than anything else. People can't afford to stay in school. So I'd really like to see those numbers and understand that question. And then also with community college, if those students enter community college with the intent of getting a degree or not. I think that's something it's a change, not necessarily in what we're doing, but it's changing the mindset of our students to want to get a degree and to know there's a path to a job that they'll be able to pay back their debt if they get that degree. So I'd love to see those numbers when you have them.
Those are really good points. I wish we had the latter. It would be fantastic to know the intent of students and measure our success rates based on versus their intent, not versus some sort of abstract idea of their intent, which is essentially what we have here. On the 4 years where I think we have more confidence in the numbers, I will simply note that if for every percentage point we increase the graduation rate at our 4-year public universities, we would be producing about 180 additional sort of pipeline degrees a year. So you take this number from 60.5% to 61.5%, that's 180 additional degrees. So tremendous opportunity here to fill that gap that I depicted on the previous slide. So our productivity strategy that we described in the paper to you has two components. The first would be to shift the basis for state funding distributions from enrollment, which is how state dollars are allocated to institutions today, to completion, to do that over time, to do that in a measured way, to do that in partnership with our institutions, but to do that. And the second portion of the proposed strategy is to provide new resources to our institutions that will help support the efforts that will need to be undertaken at the institutional level, at the campus level, in order to take advantage of these new ways in which the state allocates dollars and in order to increase success. The Commission, I think I can safely say that the Commission believes that merely doing the first of these two, merely reallocating existing resources, will not be sufficient to move the needle where we intend and need for it to go in higher education. So I'll say a little more about both of these efforts. First of all, it's reasonable to ask, well, what is the basis of a new allocation model that's not enrollment primarily driven, but would be driven by outcomes? And we've suggested here some of the measures that have been under discussion, both for shifting the community college formula as well as the public university formula. They're drawn from achievement compacts, they're drawn from institutional understanding and student understanding of key momentum points towards reaching their sort of terminal degree or certificate. It is proposed, and the Commission is highly inclined to weight certain outcomes more when they're achieved by underrepresented students, reflecting this board and the HEC's commitment to the equity lens and the great opportunity that we see in improving those outcomes specifically. What would be the effect? How's this supposed to work? What happens? I mean, what's the theory here behind shifting from enrollment to outcomes? The expectation is that it would create incentives for institutions to themselves invest the resources, which include state resources, but also tuition dollars and other funding sources, increasingly towards support for student access, student services, and completion. A variety of examples of what that shift might mean at an institutional level for students. They tend to be sort of clustered around guidance, counseling, support, course availability, focus on gateway courses, where students, struggling, and campus-based initiatives to support completion. Our role, we believe, fundamentally is not to describe or define specifically what those campus-based interventions or programs ought to be, but rather to create the funding model that incentivizes institutions to deploy their resources to in those ways. We expect that with reallocation of resources at the state level, or with incentives for completion and momentum points at the state level, we would see more access to dual credit, swifter implementation of the redesign of our developmental education sequences, expanded certificate programs, increased availability of key courses needed for degrees, more guidance and counseling, as I suggested. We expressed the notion that certain students, underrepresented students, would be weighted within a formula, funding formula that helps move forward the equity lens. I will note, we get asked a lot, so what's the evidence we have that this would work, that it would actually make any difference to reallocate and add resources? And I'd say the national story on this shift, which a number of states are in the process of making or have made, is still emerging, and it is still early. But we know that a enrollment-based funding formula has worked to drive enrollment. It has created incentives, and we see that reflected in institutional behavior for building and increasing enrollment. And the early evidence from states that have gone the farthest towards shifting that to completion have suggested that at an institutional level, behaviors, resource allocation decisions are changing to reflect greater emphasis on student support for not merely enrollment, but completion. This bar attempts to depict in a very simple way what would be different in 2015-17 versus the current budget. And so whereas our current state sort of core funding for our community colleges and public universities is allocated on the basis of enrollment today, a portion of that would begin to shift in 15-17. This is authority that the HEC has. We, under law, determine how to allocate these resources. We're including this as a portion of our budget request because, as I said before, we believe that new investment is also necessary in order to support institutions in this transition, and particularly given the context of declining state investment historically. We're at roughly equal dollars unadjusted for inflation from 1999 to today for public higher education. So you get a sense, you throw your inflation factor in there, you throw in 50% enrollment increases, and you can get a pretty good sense of how far we are behind in real dollars the level of investment that we were in 1999. I'm going to move on to the affordability strategy, unless you want to stop me here. We're sort of almost halfway through my time.
Yes.
We've been talking about this outcomes and performance and degree completion for quite some time. And I think the practitioners who are out there working have some real concerns. You say there are some states that have gone out and done this, and you don't have any data to show that this is really moving the dial. It's here you say there's some indications. But I would like to see the faculty and staff from our higher ed institutions and community college and the students engaged in some real conversations before we decide this is what we should be doing. I think there's some great concerns out there that are warranted to ask, why do we make this shift, and is it really what's going to move the dial?
So I completely agree. Would be happy to talk at any point about the process that we're using to undertake. I'm not presenting a final product on that, in part because we are still working, including with students and faculty representatives and others, on what those shifts would look like at both the community college and the public university level. But I think your point is.
But we can say though that we're not happy with the outcomes as they are right now, are we?
We believe that the outcomes could be significantly better than they are today and need to be.
So getting the input from all the players certainly makes sense, but the point is that we're not happy with the way we are right now.
Absolutely agree, but I don't think, and I've been asking for the last 2.5 years to say, can't we ask our incoming students at the community college, what is your intent? And I think we're assuming something, and we're also, the data that I see shares that the number one reason why students are not completing is because they can't afford to continue. So if that's the case, what difference does it make if we change from outcomes to enrollment, right, if we don't really make a change in how we fund? So that's where I struggle with. Sure.
Perhaps I can use that as a jumping off point for the next discussion, because we completely agree around affordability. I completely agree. I think the commission completely agrees. We looked at a task force that spent a year addressing the question of barriers to student success in higher education. This was 2 years ago. And they described affordability, or the high cost of attendance, as a foundational barrier to student success. So their surveys of students in the literature indicated that a significant portion of the challenge here is student success, which is why our second strategy we're recommending to you is a significantly increased and a different type of, sort of focused type of investment in affordability.
But also, Ben, though, there's a responsibility on the four-year institution to, I mean, there's the economic, just exactly what you described, but then there also, once the person from the 2-year goes into the 4-year, then there's some schools doing a real good job of keeping that person to complete the 4 years, and there's some that just say you're on your own type of thing. So, I mean, there's an economic responsibility there also.
Absolutely.
So I'm concerned that we're going to kill the whole time with you telling us your presentation, so I'm going to jump ahead because I've read it.
Okay.
I don't understand how focusing all the money on the first 2 years accomplishes any of our goals. I don't know any of the STEM vocations that are all done in 2 years. I mean, the notion of attracting students to school, pursuing teaching degrees or engineering degrees or anything else that's a 4-year degree, and then saying after 2 years you're on your own, seems to me designed to be a disaster, not a success story. So I'm missing something here in the logic. I'd rather take some group of students and get them all the way through than to take a whole bunch of students and get them partway through and then drop them off.
So, great, I'm glad we're there, because you're honing in on what our specific proposals are. I will note that the start here is that we fully fund the entire need, right? Or, given that we have limited resources, we have to find a way to focus and, if you will, triage state. And the suggestion that our work group, with participation from a lot of folks, made was to put that focus, especially for new resources, on the first 2 years. I will attempt to do justice to their thinking and our commissions around that question, because I think it is an important and a difficult one. I'll start by pointing at the very slide I began with and our gaps around degree and certificate production, and only note that we have a lot farther to go. In 40-40-20 suggests we have much farther to go, much more progress to make around the middle 40 than the first 40, if you will. And that is, do what you will with that, but it suggests that a concentration of state energy and resource around degrees and certificates that can be obtained in the first 2 years is important. Secondly, I will acknowledge that it would be counterproductive for us to deploy a strategy that pulls students through 2 years at a public university, say, funds them for 2 years, and then throws them off for years 3 and 4. And we're not proposing to make changes to the opportunity grant that would eliminate their ability, that would leave them with a great sort of cliff or chasm in their financial aid packages for years 3 or 4. Our commission's preference would be to fully fund it, there's no question. But the current situation, where today the triage method that we use for state financial aid resources is about $115 million a biennium. Currently, the way we triage it is we say, if you complete your FAFSA successfully after February 1st, you don't get it. If you complete it before, you get it. And and you get a flat amount. It doesn't relate to your level of need, basically. If you qualify, you get a flat amount, and you only do so if you apply early enough. So it's a very crude, very unpredictable, and very, we believe, ineffective method. The notion that we could focus dollars and say potentially to a graduating student in the class of 2015 or 2016, that if you succeed in high school, complete your diploma, complete a FAFSA, and show need, the state will fill the gap for your first 2 years, is a powerful idea that I believe we still have, we have not fully yet modeled the cost of that, although we've begun to. We think it's an idea worth pursuing and hanging on to.
Okay. To the others, I'm not persuaded, just to let you know.
Well, just my comment is, this is a great issue for the OEIB to be thinking about, because again, what we did discover is this is a highly limited pool of money, and if you don't make decisions about priorities, it will be made essentially randomly and have almost no value because people can't depend on it. So the question is, the Oregon Opportunity Grant is a great supplement to the Pell Grant, and if you don't, then we need to figure out how to target it and put one proposal on the table, and you can mix and match this in a lot of different ways.
No, I just have much more that if you want somebody to start, you need to help them finish. We shouldn't set people up for failure. And to me, what this either says is, don't pursue an academic course that takes more than 2 years, or put a lot of hard work into 2 years on a 4-year degree, and maybe you'll be able to finish it, maybe you won't. Those are not good messages to be sending out people.
I think those are really good points. And part of the challenge in a presentation like this is we're asked to bring forward a couple of discrete strategies, right? I'm not presenting you our strategic plan, which presents these and others as a sort of interlocking and related set of efforts that would, in part, I think, go some ways to addressing what you're describing and the need for that sort of maintained effort through 4 years. So we're sort of singling out one piece of what would be, in fact, a larger approach. I won't spend any time on this slide, but note that it's here for you to see how the award works today. the intent of the shared responsibility model Oregon Opportunity Grant is to fulfill the remaining need of a student or their family after assuming that a student is working, and in the case of attending a four-year school, borrowing, they're using whatever federal dollars they qualify for, Pell dollars, as well as tax credits, and then remaining need is met by the Opportunity Grant. Today, as I mentioned, for a full-time student, it's capped at $2,000. We would propose at least for some students in a predictable way to fully fund their remaining need. So this depicts as it is today. These, again, sort of reiterate the recommendations from the work group, meeting students' first two years, establishing potentially some academic achievement benchmarks, especially as you look into funding for the third and fourth year, prioritizing the award for the highest need students. So we have a lot of needy students in the state. I don't have to, so it's a uncomfortable conversation even to talk about those students with the highest level of financial need, because because there are so many who have a high level of financial need.
Do you have any sense what that gross number is? I mean, just unmet financial need in the state of Oregon? Yeah,
I do. I mean, we're awarding, and I don't think Bob's in the room, but we're awarding something like 30,000 opportunity grants to about 130,000 applicants. So those 130,000 applicants who qualify, and so we're serving a fraction of those who qualify and demonstrate need. The vast majority of those who qualify with on the basis of a $0 expected family contribution, meaning their family assets determine that they're really capable of contributing zero, and that's the vast majority of the students who qualify for the opportunity. We're not funding nearly all of those, and I will. Sorry, we'll just point out the last bullet point here about significantly enhancing the level of state funding for the Opportunity Grant. I'll show you some numbers now. Well, expected impact on key outcomes, again, sort of keying off your questions, eliminating or removing the affordability barrier in a predictable way for some students will, we believe, increase certificate and degree production. It will be measured through achievement compact measures, including ones that I referred to earlier, as well as additional metrics such as average student debt and student default rates, which are very high. And you've read and seen those reported, I'm sure. A beginning sort of take on modeling the costs here. The cost of fully funding the existing Opportunity Grant, we estimate at $747 million to serve 91,000 students. The bottom line here is what we're spending today. So I was right about the 30,000. My 100 and some thousand, that's actually FAFSA applicants. The 91,000 is how many we predict would show up. So it's somewhat fewer than actually fill out the form. But that's sort of the gap. $747 million total cost. So we're looking at options sort of closer to the $200 to $250 million range, where it would be focused, at least new dollars focused around certain populations and potentially certain years within their college experience. In terms of alignment to the equity lens, we would propose that within this one of the ways to target this grant would be to give preference to those students, as I said, with the greatest need. We have been advised that there are constraints on our ability to use racial, ethnic criteria in order to focus the grant, but the effect of focusing on the students with the greatest need is also to serve those students who are underrepresented in sort of racial, ethnic terms as well, and we believe that it would be appropriate to focus in that respect. Yes.
Can I ask you to go back a slide, because I'm trying to look at the numbers for looking at the first slide where we have the gaps, and then looking at this slide on the strategy. So currently, the students served 33,500. So is that both upper and middle 40/40s?
Correct. That's.
So currently. 33, and this would have like 28 is what it shows here, and we're looking at having to get it up to 45. Okay. I just want to make sure I was looking at the numbers correctly.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll note there is that first slide is annual completers, and of course the opportunity grant funds people who are not in their year of completion, right? So you're sort of comparing, in some respects, comparing an annual figure of completions with the opportunity grant is funding people in their first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year.
Okay, so we're way below
Yes.
our target.
Yeah,
So,
that's- Yeah, we're way below.
and
In terms of filling the need, yes, I think it's best reflected by the 91,200 who we expect need an opportunity grant. That probably underrepresents the number of students who need to be enrolled for us to meet 40-40-20.
okay, thank you.
I am about done, and I know our time is short. I will stop. Well, let me make one sort of concluding comment about this. What I have not presented to you are recommendations for targeted strategic investment in particular programs. Okay? Our commission and I'll own this. I believe that using our existing funding streams to institutions consistent with tight loose, bolstering those funding streams, and changing the way that we allocate those funding streams will create incentives for institutions to themselves devise the strategies that produce results. And I don't think it would be a valuable, especially valuable or worthwhile investment of our staff's time or the OEIB's staff's time to attempt to devise those sort of program lines or initiatives or interventions specifically ourselves. We're not the experts. So instead, we're proposing to use the roughly $1.5 billion, hopefully more, that's part of this recommendation, that the state invests in higher education to the institutions and to the students to achieve those outcomes through funding allocations, not dedicated strategic investment. I say that recognizing that in some ways is in some ways a more challenging project and in some ways a less attractive one, because it isn't possible for me to say precisely what happens when you do these things. I can't point to a new program with a label over the door that says, here's the new program that you're buying. But I do think if we're serious about fundamentally shifting institution and potentially student behavior, then this type of approach, including with significantly greater levels of investment, is what's necessary.
Any questions to Ben? Yes?
I don't know if it's to Ben, I think it's a question we need to ask some of our presidents. So if we go to a completion model, what are the thoughts of the presidents about what will I change so that I can increase the completion? What is it that they're looking at doing given that? And I haven't heard that answer, and I struggle with, we keep moving it, and so I guess I'll do an outreach to figure out what they're wanting to do.
Yes.
Because we did ask that question of all the campuses, and you'll be amazed how many great ideas they have. I would just say, again, when I read it, I read a lot of great ideas. What you come to realize is you don't want to prescribe. You want to allow them to do what they know works. And I would just have to say that both in the community colleges and the university context, they're really getting very creative on how to create these formulas to create the right incentives. I cannot tell you how impressed I am by the institutions and how they're embracing and really working with these ideas. Because there's huge value at an institutional level to pay for an outcome and a completion over enrollment, because it allows you to get creative and innovative and find new and better ways to do things.
I'd love to see that.
There's some really creative
So if you
ideas.
have
I
that-
think for Portland State, just every campus came up with really good ideas. It's on the website. But
Can you get that to me? Okay, thank you.
Ben, can you just give me the elevator deal of what you're asking for?
We're asking for you to endorse the idea that the HEC would, number one, begin to allocate some of the resources on the basis of completion, not enrollment, and number two, add to those resources in order to support institutions in making the types of changes that would be required for them to better support student success and completion.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for fitting in that time period.
Yep.
Appreciate that a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, Mark Lewis and group. Okay. Ready? You're gonna grab this thing?
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Jim Pyro, President and CEO of Portland General Electric, and I'm here in my capacity as the chair of the STEM Council. It's a group of 9 individuals from the business community, and I will be honest with you, we don't necessarily understand the education system, but we do understand the needs of business and the importance of filling those jobs from Oregonians. So we're going to give you a little update on where we've been, where we're going, and we're going to provide you 3 recommendations of where we need to move in terms of moving the STEM agenda forward. Next to me is Mark Lewis. Obviously, he's been staffing us. He's been a great assistant to the team, and I tell you, we've been working hard. We started last November. We've held 7 meetings with over 28 hours of discussions with administrators, educators, industry, and outside school business partners. So it's been very enlightening to us. We've learned a lot. And the one thing we take away from that discussion is there are a lot of small pockets of great things happening, but it's not systemic in the system. And it's usually driven by either a superintendent, a principal, or a teacher who's motivated to push the STEM agenda forward in the schools. And we've seen some wonderful programs. I would just comment on a couple. The Opal program up at the Children's Museum, Saturday Academy, but there's a number of programs that we've seen that are just doing wonderful things, but they're not systemic, and a lot of kids are missing that opportunity. So I'm going to kind of get you grounded in what we're doing, and then Mark's going to get into the details. Let's go back one. You're jumping ahead of me. Obviously, this was our charter. We were formed under the legislation to accomplish these 2 things. I would tell you these are minimum standards. I think we can do much better than this. This is not sufficient to meet the demand of the business community, and it's so that's where we are. So here's some data, and then we'll get to our recommendations. So here's the data, which basically shows that there's about a need of 70,000 jobs in STEM fields, about 7,000 per year of demand in the marketplace in Oregon, and that's good news. There is demand. Now, if you look at the next slide, well, move on to this. Let's move on to that one. Okay. Let's move to the next one. This is another look at STEM in terms of salaries and prosperity. STEM jobs are higher paid and can add a lot of value to our economy. Next slide. This is the one that's most disturbing to us as we looked at this as a council. This was a cohort of class of 2005. We start with about 35,000 kids entering, eventually graduating from high school, and only about 900 enter the system or end with a STEM degree, and that's about 2%. If you think about we need 7,000 and the system's only producing 900, there's a significant gap here in terms of the needs of industry versus what the demand in the marketplace is, and it's something we're very concerned about because this is opportunities lost for people in our state and children in our state. Next slide. Up here a little bit. So what's causing all this? And this is kind of what we've learned as we've gone through the system. There's many things that contribute to this. But I would tell you it's just the access and the fact that the kids are not getting exposed to the kinds of educational experiences that will help develop their career and see relevance as they go forward. And this is just a sample of things we heard, and it's helpful to see that. We actually held a STEM summit in April of this year. It was attended by over 200 educators and administrators to really learn about some of the barriers. And I would tell you there are a number of barriers, some of them on the sheet here, but we also recognize there's lots of assets in the state that are focused on trying to support the STEM education initiative. And the close linkage between CTE, career technical education, and STEM is really important. And there's a lot of energy in the room to make something happen, and we got a lot of good feedback from those groups as we went forward. So after all that information and work, we really sat down and said, well, what are the recommendations, what are the strategies we need to move forward to really be successful? The first one is to continue to build on the work that has already been accomplished around the STEM hubs. This is a system around the state where we funded a number of these STEM hubs. I think it's 5 or 6 now. 6 STEM hubs to really try to use a collaboration of business, educators, and the community to really see how we engage our community on STEM education and looking at the practical needs of the community and deliver real solutions to local needs. And those are up and running. They're in different states of maturity, but they are working, and we see that as a good network to continue to push STEM out to our communities. There's more demand there than there's resources today, and there's a lot of interest and appetite around these, and there's some good success stories. So we want to grow that system. The second recommendation is around programming. This is really to try the programs that make sense and develop metrics around these and help grow those programs that have success and change the trajectory of students in the STEM area. And third is just the post-secondary talent development in terms of second and four-year institutions to create those degrees that the industry needs. And that's, again, a collaboration between the education system and the business community to understand what the needs are and how we meet those demands. So Mark's going to go into greater detail, but these are the key strategies that we see to really improve the STEM outcomes that we're looking for. And it's going to take a lot of work by the community and really moving some of these good programs that we can prove through outcome-based research produce the kind of results we're looking for. So Mark, you want to give a little more detail on this?
Sure. I'll go into, unless there's questions right now.
I just have one question. On the second page, you've got the STEM jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the third page, it has STEM workers, all other STEM competitors. I'm trying to understand what that means, the competitors.
It's the difference in health professions. If you look at the two categories at the bottom, the one on the left doesn't include health professionals and other professionals, managers. It's people who take away from the STEM careers that go into other careers. So if you're like a civil engineer and you become a manager, you're no longer practicing the profession of engineering, then you look like you're a competitor for STEM because you take out of the system. That's the way I would try to describe it. Mark, you have that too?
Yeah, just to add a little bit. Right now, the definitions from the Georgetown University Center on Education and Workforce actually does not include healthcare professions. We're choosing most people around the country are choosing to include healthcare professions as part of the STEM workforce demand.
So on the first slide, it has them as part of the STEM, and on the second, it takes them out. So
it's just from a salary standpoint.
Okay.
It's an optical thing. This one came from a different place.
Okay. Thank you. I was just trying
I didn't generate those. Those were pulled from different places.
Right.
Yeah, so sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to tell you, thank you, Jim. Chair Withnell and members of the committee, for the record, my name is Mark Lewis, Director of STEM for the OEIB. It should be noted that this strategy, one, is currently one of the strategic investments that was made this last biennium and is currently up and running. There are 6 active STEM hubs that were funded in this last round. Those include the Portland Metro STEM Partnership, the South Metro Salem STEM Partnership, Douglas County, Bend, the Coast, Eastern, and that's it, of the 6. There's about 6 more communities that we know of right now, possibly 7, who are also had applied but are waiting in the wings and working alongside of these funded STEM hubs to better understand their approaches and what the opportunities exist for them in their communities. This is really, as Jim had previously said, we're really looking at local solutions to local needs built around workforce, economic development, education, and community development needs to try to really transform how we're educating our students and to make sure that education is tightly coupled with those needs of that community. Some of the things that we are asking those STEM hubs to do is to create STEM partnership plans that includes not only the program activities, but what are the data that they're paying attention to in their community, what's driving this. I will say in a little bit more that this is a model that has been rolled out across the country, and those places where it's most successful are those places where they're really attending deeply to meeting the needs of, there's an economic imperative or a community imperative that's driving that work. It's not just an educational initiative. It is really driven by the greater community. We're expecting that these STEM partnerships really focus very tightly on educator professional development and learning, really partnering with industries in that regard to shift toward a more project-based, active form of education to really engage and motivate our students and again, not to bore them to death. And we expect over time that this initiative would be blended into and alongside those other regional initiatives that exist in many of those communities. It's not at a place right now. All of those have a different level of momentum, and some communities are ready to do that right now, and others just aren't. And so, but we're very mindful that this has a very similar feel and flavor to the Regional Achievement Collaboratives and the Eastern Promise Grants in particular. As you'll note that we are expecting an awful lot from these regional STEM hubs. In fact, almost all of the key outcomes that are on the OEIB scorecard would be addressed and in part by this initiative. I want to say that what we're asking for in terms of an investment would really require support for a backbone organization. These sorts of collaborations actually take a considerable amount of effort to communicate and to bring the cohesiveness of these different partners together and to ensure that the work is moving forward. It also requires that we are noticing now, even more so, is that at a state level, how do you actually connect these hubs together so that they're functioning effectively, to providing technical assistance so that you're providing the necessary sort of oversight and encouragement, sort of the hug and the push, to make sure that these partnerships are actually moving forward in alignment with a larger vision for the state. In terms of equity, every single one of the STEM hubs are required to disaggregate their data by their underserved and underrepresented populations. We are asking them to, or we have asked them as part of the RFP process for the current ones that are funded, to be very, very specific about their data and their needs, and to include leadership from our communities of color in the decisions that are being made with the hubs.
I wonder if I could ask,
Yep.
Jim, you just had a board meeting here with people all across the CEOs across the United States. Did you ever run any of this stuff by them? What's their...
Well, when I talk to the CEOs across the country and EEI, education is an issue in every one of their jurisdictions and where they are, and providing enough engineers in our space. In the utility space, we need a lot of engineers, and the need for engineers continues to grow, and we're losing a lot because of the baby boomers that are retiring. So most companies are facing we're facing almost 10 to 15% retirements over the next couple of years. Wow. It's a big number, a lot of us. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and in places like Ohio, North Carolina, New York, these have really been the engines of an economic recovery in many of these communities. North Carolina in particular has some very strong success stories there where industry and education came together to really completely revitalize how they're thinking about it and how they're engaging their education system, K-12 and their post-secondary system, in order to meet those local workforce needs as well as the workforce needs of the state as a whole or the region. Question? Carry on.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Strategy number 2 that we're proposing is really to have a lot more targeted investments to create a lot more agility in actually meeting the needs of our underserved and underrepresented communities. It's really built on a couple of things that you'll see is that we recognize that one of the critical years in terms of STEM is these middle school years. It's an age where one's social identity is being formed. It's where micro-messaging has a dramatic impact on the decisions, the life decisions that individuals make. We know that girls and persons of color oftentimes don't receive the same messages, whether those are aspirational. Of course, you'll be going to college, this sort of thing, but also how they perceive themselves as being capable, STEM capable, mathematically capable. We hear that, it's okay, honey, I was never good at math either. Those are really pernicious messages for individuals, and they really begin to get solidified in those middle school years. And as we look across the P20 system, we thought that we need to be targeting that specifically, that age group and that population. You'll note that the STEM Investment Council is also recommending that 75% of all of these investments do go towards serving underserved and underrepresented populations in STEM. So we're very, very serious about making sure that that's where these funds would go. And that we would be leveraging philanthropy as well as other private investments to supplement these public dollars as well.
There's 3 business guys here that missed that middle school part.
Just out of curiosity, so the second bullet there, the 75%
Yeah.
going to underserved. So we have 6 pilots going on right now. What percentage of
6
that-
pilots of STEM hubs.
Yeah, of STEM hubs. So what are we doing this year with the underrepresented students of color? Do you have any numbers on, did we hit the mark this year about really investing in those who need us to invest, or is this a priority for next year moving forward?
It was a priority there were 3 investments made in this last biennium, strategic investments. There was $2.5 million provided for the STEM hubs,
Right.
of which a portion, there was strong encouragement and desire to focus on underserved and underrepresented populations in those efforts. The STEM/CTE/STEAM funds, which was about $2.2 million, went out to 17 different organizations, most of whom were, and I can get you more precise figures, so I'm going to say most of whom were serving students of color and girls.
Great. Because the reason I ask is sometimes some groups have the ability to write a grant to get money, but they already have money because they have a grant writer to write to get more money. So I just want to make sure that we're providing the assistance so that it gets to the students that we really want to serve.
Absolutely, and I'm
or
glad.
how thin the soup is. It's too broad-based to make effect.
No, this is one of those places where we recognize in both the STEM hub strategy as well as the STEM activities that was. Be blunt. It was a weakness in the process where, when you have reviewers who are reading, where all of their intelligence is actually coming from the application itself rather than the broader business intelligence that one can get by actually making visits, understanding what the community needs are, understanding the organizations. The idea behind this is much more of a business investment strategy where we would gather that kind of intelligence before making determinations and not just relying on the application process solely. So I totally agree with you on that. And there's no guarantee then that those organizations, the other thing that you look for before you make an investment is, do they have the capacity to deliver? Do they understand what the need is? Do they have the necessary partnership and leadership at the table? So there's a number of different dimensions that would go into making decisions of this kind.
Thank you.
I think it's really worthwhile pointing out that we're looking at, and I'm sorry, Jim, I didn't finish the third one here. I submitted this. I was supposed to move this bullet point down into here to notice that it's a cycle of what we would do is that there would be shorter term interventions that are really sparking that creativity, that are understanding that this is emerging promising approaches that we would want to invest in and learn from. And then there's also the dissemination funds where there's already been ample evidence of their effectiveness, and what we're really looking at is how do you spread and scale and this kind of an approach to additional communities across the state. Yeah.
So just to make sure, I think this is a pretty important distinction. What you're really asking is for a flexible pot of money to distribute a lot more with a lot more nimbleness than just having a grant program.
A lot more agility, yes.
So that I think that's, if we agree with that, that's a really important advocacy point. I personally agree that we need, the council needs that kind of flexibility to really make change. And I think we are all stuck in this grant, which I don't think does.
Entrepreneurial.
This is
much more entrepreneurial.
We have to recognize that there are risks to that, but I think the benefits are.
And then
the programs need to be promising and show opportunity, and then you have to be able to measure the results so that we can demonstrate that it's actually producing, which is sometimes forgotten in the process.
Yeah, hopefully this is.
Yeah.
Which are those key outcomes, and then also the new capacity within the OEIB's research team that Peter's leading is very...
How about 7-8 minutes?
Okay, 7 or 8 minutes, great. Just want to let you know that in terms of the focus area, so I talked about the focus population, target population, the places that we think are most urgent right now are really to increase early coding and computing skills within our system. engineering mindsets. This is part of the Next Generation Science Standards, but the vast majority of K-12 educators do not understand what engineering is, what are the different flavors of engineering, what's an engineering mindset. This idea that the critical nature of risk-taking, of failure, or of iterations has in the learning process when you do design thinking. And then mathematics is perhaps the biggest barrier in regard to STEM in our entire system from a content perspective, and we need to build off of some of the adaptive learning technologies that exist out there, as well as more of those project-based applications where students are really understanding why and how the mathematics is being used, not dissociated from the context in which they're being used. Outcomes, absolutely. Lots of them, yes. We're in favor of outcomes, and positive ones at that. Next slide. I've already spoken to the fact that we would be targeting underserved and at-risk populations. I want to just highlight a little bit around the evidence of the strategy. There's a lot of research that is going behind both the need to target this age demographic, but also to really embrace this idea that education is a collective responsibility and that our out-of-school time providers have a critical role to play, both within the agility of the system as a whole, but also to be much more nimble and responsive to accessing these different populations. We're not saying, we are saying that this needs to be a complementary to changes that are happening within the K-12 system and not dissociated from that at all, but that an investment that includes out-of-school time providers is critical to actually get outcomes sooner rather than later. Just some additional ones. These are in your slide. I do want to point out that we would be relying on the STEM hubs for a lot of the business intelligence of the community, as well as our own due diligence in that. So this is again integrated with that other activity or investment strategy. The final strategy that we're proposing is really around this idea of post-secondary talent development. There's already a lot of talent in the pipeline itself that we're not fully utilizing. As Director Cannon mentioned earlier, we need a lot more focus in the post-secondary environment and incentives for those institutions to change and adapt to industry-driven needs. From the Employment Services Department data that we've received and what we hear from the Workforce Investment Board, these are some of the additional areas that are high demand in the STEM field. We have a model over history of the Engineering and Technology Industries Council, ETIC, as you'll know, who has been investing in that post-secondary space. The idea is to take the best of what ETIC has accomplished to date and to spread it to both community colleges as well as to these additional sectors. Really, these are short-term investments to encourage incentives to change and adapt their programming. The idea is that the institutions themselves, through their funding formulas, would then pick up the ongoing support of this program adaptation. And then the second piece of this strategy is to really have those wraparound services that encourage completion and retention of our students of color and our women in STEM. Again, the micro-messaging and the cultures that exist oftentimes in the post-secondary environment are not conducive or not encouraging for many populations to persist and to continue toward degree. There are some examples, particularly the Lewis Stokes program at OSU and PSU, that have shown phenomenal results by building community, by providing leadership, by attaching individuals to undergraduate research opportunities, and to really build a sense of belonging and purpose there in those post-secondary environments. And we would expect that some of these funds would then be targeted to those kind of support programs. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Well,
Ron?
Jim, at the beginning you talked about the difference between the 900 and some graduates Are we filling that gap with imports, or are we not filling it, or what's happening to the gap?
Kind of a little of both. I mean, we're filling a lot with imports, basically, but then some jobs are just going unfilled. And businesses are either choosing to go elsewhere or just not growing as fast as they can. Eric Meslow said he can't grow because he can't find the people. So it's limiting the opportunities to grow in some cases. So it's a combination.
Do we have a sense that, like, the Washington State programs in Vancouver and stuff, are they serving Oregonians, or are they serving Washington markets, or what do they do?
It's a good question. I don't know.
I would suspect that it serves some of the Oregon market because they're looking for the best job. But don't have any data.
Yeah, and I do know that many of the graduates from the Vancouver K-12 tend to gravitate toward this side of the river as well.
Anything else?
Well, I'm going back to the report about the jobs that are available and what we project for the employment division. So are these mainly four-year degrees that you're looking for? Okay.
They're both. It's 40-40-20. This is really middle 40 as well as that.
So I go back to the report that we got from the employment division saying that if we do get to 40-40-20, we won't have the jobs, we won't have the living wage jobs that would be appropriate for those degrees. So I'm just, and as I look
So
at
overproducing.
Yeah.
You're concerned about an overproduction.
Well, no, I mean, I really wanted to get there, but I want to make sure that we're doing our work to make sure that there are jobs for each and every one of our graduates once we get them through the system. And I think that's something that would be helpful to understand a little better about what the business community is doing to create those jobs. As you say, they can't get enough. And so I want to understand where that is.
We actually saw a great chart that showed what degrees are being created versus what the demand is, and there's definitely a mismatch.
Yeah.
We're missing on the engineering side, and we're producing too many liberal arts degrees and the kind of jobs for those people. So they're getting degrees, but they're getting them in the wrong field in terms of where the jobs
Those are the ones
are.
that we've seen.
We get that graph for you.
And that goes back to STEM then?
Yeah, it goes back to STEM, because they're not entering that field.
The other thing to note is that in the job filling, on a national level, there's a debate about STEM and STEM graduates, and it shows that something to the effect of 50% of STEM graduates don't get jobs in STEM directly into what is classified as a STEM job. But that part of the challenge there is definitional, but also it's noted that a lot of people who get engineering degrees end up going into business and management or going into law, because what you're developing is also a certain type of a mindset that is actually beneficial across the market.
I think that may be, because I've heard this research, and when we talk about it, it's what do we need to do to make sure that we're preparing people for the right? Hopefully that's what they want to do, and hopefully not pushing something.
And then
Thank you.
just a little bit on the other side of this is that around innovation and economic growth it's not just about filling jobs, but it's also about creating jobs and developing individuals who have that entrepreneurial mindset, who are going to go out there and actually generate new opportunities to generate revenue and wealth for the state.
In lay terms, what's the ask then, real quick, what would you?
Do I have permission to say? There is a medium investment for strategy 1. There is a modest investment for strategy 2 and a medium investment for strategy 3.
Okay.
How's that?
Also,
Thanks, Whitney.
I guess we're not supposed to be talking about the numbers. I take it from that answer. But you might also want to talk about the impact on the economy and the revenues.
The ROI.
Because, I mean, we've looked at those numbers, in the past, and it's really quite striking. Because if you fill those higher wage jobs, the revenue.
There's I don't have those numbers with me right now, but there's some studies that have shown dramatic revenue increases. On average, STEM jobs get paid at 25% more on average than non-STEM jobs, which then directly translates into additional tax revenue and additional spending revenue within the system as a whole. So that's a pretty substantial margin of difference.
Okay, thank you guys. Jim, hey, thanks for you. I mean, you're a busy guy. I mean, honestly.
It's been a great effort, and Mark's been great to staff. And we got a great council. They've been really engaged and totally committed to making this happen, so thanks.
Appreciate that a lot.
Thank you.
Okay. Yvonne. Hi, Yvonne.
Hi.
I know you.
Yeah.
Best practices. Well, let's quit practicing and let's get it on, huh?
Okay. And we'll be clear about that. You can short version of what you're used to. Pass it here. Okay.
Introduce yourselves, please, and then
Yes. Pardon me?
introduce yourselves. So-
Okay, Yvonne Curtis. I'm Hilda Rosselli. I'm chair of the best practice, and Hilda is support from OEIB, who's been a wonderful support. Keeps the rigor on all of us, which is really great. We're here today to share with you recommendations from the best practice panel and student transitions of the OEIB. Throughout the year, we had 11 meetings beginning in October of 2013, and our scope of work included what you see up here, K-12 student transitions 11 to 14, educator quality, transforming learning through digital conversion, and rural and remote communities. We had opportunities for public testimony at all of our meetings. They were all public meetings, and we gave monthly updates to the full OEIB board. So what we'd like to recommend is strategy one for us, the one that ranked highest in priority to bring to you with the committee, is Spanish benchmarking and student progress monitoring tools in literacy. You know, for a while we weren't really clear whether the field of research around how to serve ELL students was really pointing to dual language and supportive native literacy. There wasn't consensus in the field. Now, there's a lot of consensus in the field that that's the best approach. It makes sense because a lot of our students might have literacy in Spanish. What we need to do is really bridge that language and hold on to the asset of their primary language. Now, in order to know if the programs that offer the Spanish language for native speakers, which by the way is also bringing on native English speakers to a second language in Spanish, in order for us to know if they're effective, we need to be doing benchmarking along the way and progress monitoring. And the progress monitoring then enables us to identify intervention. So we're asking for investment in putting together and designing the needed benchmarking and progress monitoring tools in Spanish. We have them in English. The investment addresses strategy 2, focusing state investment on achieving key student outcomes, and strategy 3, which is building statewide support systems. Strategy 1, outcomes. Our key outcome on achievement compact would be the increase in the number of Spanish third graders reading on grade level in Spanish in programs where we're offering dual language or transitional biliteracy. And we're wanting these measures to be aligned with English measures because then we can determine where they are in Spanish, where they are in English, and we can measure biliteracy as well. So the annual data would be used to measure improvement would include the monitoring of students' biliteracy progress in both Spanish and English. A moderate investment would support the development, the piloting, the score setting of these tools to determine the effectiveness of models for serving English language learners. So we've already made some investment in studying and promoting the development of additional dual language programs, but we don't really have all the tools to really assess those programs. So that's what we're asking for. In terms of equity considerations, how will the strategy improve outcomes for underserved and at-risk populations? Currently, Oregon has 71 two-way dual language programs in 70 districts. All but one of those, the second language is Spanish. 70% of the dual language programs are offered in elementary schools. They're reaching about 1,400 students. The evidence we have the strategy will be successful. Assessing students in Spanish allows districts to monitor progress in developing literacy skills, as I mentioned before, and better help students transfer their skills into English. When we have tools that enable us to understand their literacy development in the native language, then we're better able to not only provide intervention to them, but also professional development to teachers on exactly what skills need to be bridged to English. How would the strategy align with the equity lens? In the equity lens, there is a belief statement that says everyone has the ability to learn and has a right to an optimal learning environment. Optimal learning environments for students who come to school with Spanish as their first language would be to support that language as well as moving them on to English. Especially now in Oregon, because more and more of our students are second, third, fourth generation students who are really what we're calling now functional bilinguals all along the way. So we know in our district, for example, that we have students in our dual language program whose parents and grandparents were in our dual language program already. So we know now, we haven't always produced the kind of outcomes that we know now that we can get from research, and part of that is we've had no ability to assess how successful we were until we kind of just guessed how much did that attribute to their success by graduation. So it was just sort of a ballparking. There are assessments out there that are diagnostic tools, but there isn't a progress monitoring and benchmarking that's aligned with English literacy, that's also aligned with our summative assessments and the Common Core state standards. So the other equity consideration is that speaking a language other than English is an asset, and we want to continue to promote that and send that message. Other considerations, the Oregon Department of Education is working on, so they're already working on this idea of looking for and promoting the sort of permission and providing an instrument for Spanish language outcomes in a summative evaluation. So what that means is, as we move to smarter balance assessment, it doesn't help us to continue to say we want kids on grade level in third grade in reading in English when many of them we're instructing them in Spanish first if we don't have a tool for measuring what their literacy is in a summative assessment as well. Then I also wanted to mention that there is ongoing research already happening as part of our other focuses in Oregon Department of Education with the grants that were provided to the dual language program. When we designed the English language strategic plan, what we knew we needed to do as a state was to look at the dual language programs we currently had going on in the state, determine which ones were getting the best outcomes, identify what were those best practices, and then be able to scale up and duplicate them in other places. Again, it's really difficult to do that if you don't have any measurement tools that are aligned. So, let's see, did I finish on that? Let me finish on this side. Is that the strategic? That's the other consideration. It's tied to that. Right, and I just mentioned that. It's tied to this in the strategic plan. We have it written there. Strategy 2 is around the recruitment and retention of a more diverse educator workforce. And Hilda's going to... Oh, sorry.
Do you want to finish one?
Sure, however you want to do it.
Yeah, if it works. So the assessment that you're talking about creating, are you talking about like the smarter balanced in Spanish or the ELPA in Spanish? What or something totally different?
So what this would be aligned with, for example, is Easy CBM,
Okay.
which is a progress monitoring and benchmarking. We know, as I mentioned, ODE is already pursuing the idea of kind of a side-by-side with the smarter balance. I know that they've put out RFPs and are looking at what's out there. That would be the summative assessment. We're asking for progress monitoring and benchmarking, which allows us to assess students in fall, winter, spring. And then it also...
Interim assessments?
Interim assessments,
Okay.
but these are very specific kind of interim, because when you talk about common and interim assessments, that includes kind of a big basket of proficiency and all kinds of stuff. We're talking about specifically being able to do these 3 times a year benchmarking, and then to have progress monitoring that are quick measures you can give kids every couple of weeks to see if you're giving in an intervention, is that intervention working and can you adjust it? In order to do the response to intervention that we need to be doing with all kids, to determine if the core instruction is working before we identify any kids for special needs services, we have to go through the RTI process. You cannot do the RTI process in dual language schools without this kind of assessment.
So would the students we'd be using the Spanish tool, not the Spanish and the English? Would we be double testing them, I guess is the question, with Spanish and English?
So it depends on the grade level and it depends on the program. So I can give you an example in our school district. Right now, easy CBM measures do exist, which are progress monitoring benchmark measures, exist in Spanish and English K through 2. So in the fall, we assess our kids in Spanish and English so we can get a baseline of where they are. If their language of instruction, literacy instruction, is Spanish, then we will, again, in winter and in spring, assess their Spanish to see how they're progressing on Spanish. If they're at a higher grade level, like second or third grade, where we're already transitioning to English, we would be assessing them in both those languages. But these are quick assessments for the most part. Some of them take a minute. There are a little bit longer comprehension ones, but you don't have to use all of them. This is shorter, teacher-administrated measures.
Okay.
I don't want to get too much in the weeds.
I understand the ECBM, so you're just looking for something.
So we'd like to make sure that those are developed through the rest of the grades so that we could have that continuity all along the way. I just want to be careful at this point because we can't say which assessment.
Right.
I'm just calling out we're calling out the need for the development of that.
Yes, Ron?
So I'm confused, and so I need some help.
Okay.
The first page, the assignment of your committee, has a whole bunch of things here, K-12
Right.
transitions. The only real recommendation other than teacher diversity is about Spanish-speaking third graders. Am I missing something?
So it's about Spanish-speaking third graders who we want to be literate in English by third, fourth, and
I'm
fifth.
thrilled that recommendation's on the list. The mystery to me is why is that the only recommendation on the list?
So what we had a lot of recommendations that came to us through all these different presentations, and the committee went through numerous meetings and processes to narrow down because we understood that we needed to narrow it to 2 priorities to bring here. And so we used a number of filters to decide, for example, where was work already happening and where were we going to get sort of our biggest bang for our buck right now. And so these were the 2 priorities that came forward because there's already work going on and we wanted to provide whatever was needed to make sure that that work could continue and we could get gains from it.
So
We
maybe
could
it's-
have brought recommendations
Yeah, but I
from
don't know,
area.
maybe it's a question for Whitney or whoever. I mean, I actually thought almost this entire 40-40-20 exercise is about finding best practices for how to help our schools improve. So the notion that we only get to have 2 of them and that the 2 of them are focused on Spanish-speaking kids and minority students for diversity, those are wonderful. I love the 2 recommendations. I don't understand why in the world we would limit it to those 2 recommendations.
So we're only bringing to you the areas where we're asking for additional key investment. There's a lot of other best practices that we are already recommending on to other groups, for example, early learning or other. There's a whole bunch of different agencies and groups working on work in these areas. So we have a huge chart that we could show you that shows where we're sort of calling out and supporting work already being done, or sending sort of charges to different groups around best practice. All we're bringing you is a very small slice of, we need some funding here in order to move on.
So maybe it's a Nancy question. If we've said 3rd grade reading is a huge priority for all 3rd graders, not just Spanish-speaking 3rd graders, and we've said, the 11-14 transition, huge priority. So where are those being addressed? I don't want to go 2 more years and say now we're now let's talk 2 years from now in the next biennium about it. So where are the proposals about all 3rd graders and their reading? And
That was the one
That was
missed, Ron.
from ODE, they did present that.
Okay.
Very
And the
concrete, and
ALC.
also something for.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
But let's make sure you know where.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Whitney.
So there was, so Rob Saxon brought forward a really comprehensive plan for early literacy and 3rd grade reading that in conjunction with the work that the Early Learning Council has done. And then the Accelerated Learning Committee also brought forward some recommendations, some of which are investment, but the other thing that's I've asked the groups to do is to differentiate between sort of policy recommendations that would be put into place versus investment recommendations, which they're bringing here today. So a lot of the work the best practices subcommittee did ended up feeding into the budget recommendations that ODE made, that the Early Learning Council made, that the Accelerated. So it's these
But
guys
help
are
me still,
sort of
so
doing.
why isn't this part of Rob's proposal? Why is this here today with this group?
Well, so I think it's a good debate to have. I think that one of the things that will be really helpful and informative of sort of building the governor's budget is a clear recommendation for you in terms of where we're best sort of making trade-offs. You know, are we going for sort of spread statewide strategy? Or are we looking for more directed, more targeted strategies? Because if we're going to move the dial, you know, we're going to have to make choices. And so I think it's a healthy debate. It's a good debate to have and to sort of think through, you know, and hopefully you're getting good data from folks where you can really sort of weigh those. And part of Rob's proposal around third grade reading was the sort of like small, medium, large.
Right.
You know, do you do targeted investments for focus and priority schools? Do you sort of spread the investment and make the resource available to all schools, hoping that so I think the question is, and then when you think about this proposal, do we make an investment for a population that persistently shows that, you know, that isn't achieving? Will that, given demographic change, given sort of the opportunity to move the dial, you know, and I think that's the debate to have.
But to just have the debate a little bit now,
Yeah.
just help me understand why either this isn't part of what Rob brought forward, or why your group isn't bringing forward something for all third graders. I guess what I'm not understanding is why is some of third grade reading part of Rob's proposal, and why is some of third grade reading
Well,
this group's
I think you're going to be doing. I mean, I think that's the power of this committee, is that you get to sort of do the threading of that needle. Seeing from each different agency, each different committee, sort of where they've made some priorities, they've made some choices, and then I think, you know, certainly when you have the retreat, you can sort of ask the question, you know, are these two discrete priorities, or should this be woven better, more elegantly woven into the larger strategy, or should the larger strategy more elegantly be, you know, spoken to in here?
And Robin, I also hear you asking, could we create a graphic or something that really shows the relationship between these? Because, you know, we did start with a broad category, and then we said, now here's another place you're going to have to focus deeper, because what we see with our opportunity gap is if we do nothing different, it's going to keep going parallel, but it's never going to close. So we want to get everyone up, but we also want to close. So there's going to be a get everyone up strategy and a close strategy. And this, the one Rob presented moves everyone, but this one also focuses towards closing the opportunity
Right, and
gap.
I don't want anybody to think I'm not supporting
No,
what you're
no,
presenting.
yeah.
I'm just confused about why it's a standalone thing out here.
I could also offer one other explanation, and that is that this committee last year was charged to sort of be accountable for what the OEIB approved last year, which was the English language strategic plan. So we have been having several presentations throughout the year from the folks that were implementing the plan. And this was one of those, oh my goodness, we missed something, and it wasn't called out before. And then the second part of this report is really an area that is not one group's domain in terms of ODE. Teacher preparation is one of those areas that falls out here in this world, and TSPC is the agency that has responsibility for it, but it crosses over a lot of
So
things.
instead of best practices, you're sort of what got missed somewhere else.
But wait till you see the long list of all the other
we have
best
a long list of the
practices.
best practices in each one of those areas, and we understood what you really wanted today was for us to just focus on just the key investments that our committee thought were the key ones that could move the dial the most with the least amount of investment, get our biggest bang for our buck kind of thing, and make sure that we were aligned with the other, like third grade reading and how we were going to get there. And again, we may have been hearing different groups than other groups were working on, so that kind of plays into the prioritization sometime. I guess I just want to say about the whole process, I think there's so much work going on in all of these committees, and we are trying to cross and link as much as possible, so that's where we're asking for your help with that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Hilda, and she's going to talk about educator retention and
And this is one of those areas that, in many ways, the OEIB is responsible for reporting back on and monitoring progress towards Senate Bill 755, which was the Minority Teacher Act revision that came through this last legislative session. And this first chart here is probably a great way to show you a detail around a growing gap that we monitor, and that is that if we acknowledge that over 30% of our students in K-12 are minority students or are of a particular race and ethnicity other than Caucasian and English, what we also know is that our demographics of our educator workforce, particularly in this case teachers, is nowhere near close to that. In fact, we somewhere usually hover around 8.6%. And so some of you are aware that just earlier this month, the first status report was developed by many partners working together with the Oregon Education Investment Board to report to the legislators where we are with this. And we have made some investments. The committee listened to testimony and looked at data from TSPC and from the educator preparation programs, and still feel as though this is not something that we've made enough progress on. Although the pipeline, the production appears to be on target to meet the 2015 goal, that's a very minimal goal. It only said you will grow at 10% from 2012 data. It's still not going to get us where we need to be. And likewise, we actually backed up a little bit this year in terms of the number of teachers of color employed in the school districts. Now, there was an interesting phenomena that we can't quite tease out, and that was that we saw a bump in the number of administrators of color. So it's possible that you had some teachers move from teaching positions into positions of administrators. So that is why this continues to be a particular focus. The other thing is that we are faced with looking at the results of an uptick in the job market that increased the number of teaching positions this year. And what actually we are hearing from some of our more rural and remote districts is that they were able to recruit candidates during that market slump, and now they're losing those candidates to other districts that may offer a higher salary or some other amenities that the candidates are seeking. And actually the research on recruitment of teachers to rural and remote areas is quite interesting, because the factors that tend to show up as being significant in a teacher's decision to move to a community that they did not grow up in is quite unrelated to what you might think. There are a lot of other things that go into a person's decision. And likewise, when they look at the people who grew up in the local rural community returning back after a program, if they do not have significant tied-in experiences while they're preparing to be educators that take them back into their rural communities, they're very likely to stay in a more urban community. So this was called out to us as a concern, particularly as we look at the uptick in the market right now. In terms of outcomes, these are out.
Can I gotta ask
Certainly.
a question? It's not probably really PC, but by having, go back to your chart there where you have the keep back. Okay, if we were at the race students and teachers were up where we'd want to be, would that get us out of being the bottom 10% of education in the United States?
Well, the research is very clear that
Let me put it another way.
the impact
Would I
of
care if we had 100% minority teachers in Oregon and we were the top 10% of education? Would I care as a citizen?
I think what you would see would be an increase in the support and progress of students of color. They very much, the literature is very clear that the impact, in fact, this research was done most recently by the new dean of Eastern Oregon's College of Education. They looked at reading and math scores and found a significant difference for students of color who've had an experience with a teacher of color versus students who had no exposure to an educator of color. Significant differences in the results that those kids got. That's not even counting the bigger overarching theme, which is a role model and a connector to the communities and families. So those three areas
I guess
are
what
what's
I'm
really going to
asking,
help.
or stating is that we need the support of the total community. And the community, I think, is focused not only on that, but they're also focused on outcomes too. So I think if we put all of our attention on that, and we don't have the outcomes moving the dime, then maybe...
During the next presentation, I think what you'll see is that we are also advocating for some continued support around the improvement of our educator workforce and support for them. So you're going to see that, again, this is sort of boxed out into some different components, but I think the next session you'll see where we're leaning towards in that area.
And
Hannah?
I'll just add, my experience is this will make a huge difference.
Well,
We need
good.
to have our workforce mirror
who we're teaching.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
What Hilda's sharing about the correlation between the achievement of students is
Then we need to say that what, so to speak, what the return on investment for that is. We need to say that because out of this room here, I don't know if that sells quite as well as it's. I mean, I probably traveled the wrong route, but
I understand.
so, and I'm really in your corner, but that's perfect. Okay. And I'm taking up all your time. We have 6 minutes left.
So I'll be quick around this. Obviously, there are elements in the achievement compacts and in the OEIB metrics that we are responsible for reporting to you here in terms of the increase of non-white, Hispanic, or non-native English educators, as well as the support that educators feel around their professional development. And that work is underway and will be part of what we would be monitoring. I think it's also important, though, that we look at the retaining factor. How well are we hanging on to educators when they do come into the system, as well as how does that align with our supply and demand data, which we have not had a systematic way of doing, and we are now working on based on some strategic investments during the 2013 session. What we're suggesting is that a substantial investment, wait a minute, is it moderate, modest, and substantial would support the costs for students to be supported for both tuition and stipends as they go through their programs, as well as some retention projects. We were only able to fund 3 retention projects this year in districts, and we are looking to those districts to give us the examples of what made the difference for them. Hillsborough was one of them, Portland was one of them, and I'm thinking Clement might have been one of them. So we're looking to see how we could increase the retention projects, because it doesn't do enough to just prepare educators and hire them, but you have to hang on to them as well. Very clear connections to the equity considerations, and I would be delighted to forward you some of the specific research that we've been looking at relative to achievement test scores and other factors in the impact that it makes.
You can give us an example of those three districts that you just said that they improved.
They are definitely, we are getting the first level of reports back on, because they haven't even completed 1 year of support. They're about 6 months into their project. But we will be bringing you those results next year. In terms of equity considerations and the equity lens, it's a very clear connection to that. There are a couple of other considerations. One is that House Bill 3233 did start us in this endeavor to invest in pipeline and retention, as well as Senate Bill 755, pointing us to the importance of this. We are also really working carefully as a result of the Teach Oregon projects to examine what are the very best strategies for interviewing and recruiting and retaining educators so that we can share those best practices across the board. There is a group that has been formed to advise this process and to advise the minority teacher report. They have come up with their own scorecard, so they are holding us accountable and reporting to the governor on those results. And most important, we're doing a study in conjunction with our coalition of communities of color on over 1,000 educators that we believe are in this state, are keeping their license current, and they are self-identifying as teachers of color. and we have to find out why they are not employed in our school districts. We know some, yes, it was shocking to me. I thought there was an extra zero, and that's not the case. We know that some of them may be actually pursuing some incredible other education-related positions. They may be in grad school, they may have stopped out for families, they may be crossing the line and teaching in Vancouver. But we are very concerned that there are some of them who have some insights that we need to know about so that we can figure out what's going on and why are we losing them at that rate.
Some of them would be substituting possibly, would you know that too?
Some could be substituting. And we also know that as the institutions did better in the pipeline, the market went down. And so you have a lot of unemployed new educators. So it could be that a portion of those are just suffering from the downturn 2 years ago and 3 years ago, and we may see some of that bump up again. I think that concludes my presentation. And the complete package, right?
Any
Well,
comments?
with whatever that 1,000 people is, I mean, some kind of incentive to encourage them back in is a whole lot easier and cheaper than training new people or
Exactly.
Exactly.
And we have to find out if they're interested.
Yeah, find them and get
What
them
would
back.
motivate them?
Do something to make them interested.
There's an issue with providing the support for our teachers of color in our districts. I mean, there's some differentiation that has to happen that's just frankly not happening, so people are leaving. They're not comfortable in the setting that they are. And there are things that we can do to improve that. But that's one of those, going back to the third grade and whether we invest in Spanish speaking for third grade. Those are really difficult conversations here in Oregon, but if we don't address the issues of inequality that we have, we're going to continue on the path that we've been going down. And I think that's one of our biggest charges, is to actually differentiate our investments so we hit the mark with students that we've been not hitting the mark with.
I think the great piece is that when we did the first round of key investments, I think we hit the mark really well on most of them. And so now we're just drilling down a little farther and finding out, so what else do we need to do? And that's kind of why we're sort of picking in some of the recommendations a little bit more at the weeds, like what are those? Remember, Nancy charged us all with looking at what are the barriers. So right now, using the Spanish assessment as an example, it's a small investment for a huge return in terms of we'll actually know how we're doing in those programs, can make those adjustments and provide other interventions. Until we do that, we'll be in the same place we are right now because we don't know. We're in the dark.
Okay, Vaughn, thank you very much. Hilda, you're staying put, right? You want to change chairs, or are you okay?
I like this chair, but I'd like to invite another colleague up.
Sure.
And to give you some background here and let Jonna introduce herself, the 2013 legislative session resulted in funding a network of quality teaching and learning. And Jonna is my counterpart in the Oregon Department of Education. I'll let you introduce yourself and share what you do.
Great.
And you're starting us off anyway.
Good afternoon. I'm Jonna Timms. I am at the Oregon Department of Education working with the Network for Quality Teaching and Learning. And so that is coordinating and really being able to start telling the story around how these investments are supporting educator effectiveness, implementation of Common Core, and some high leverage initiatives across the state and supporting elevating the teaching profession. So we are going to start off. Hilda, I'm going to have you actually start off a little bit on the advisory group, and then I'll take over with.
Well, one of the first things that we realized was that this was a very valuable investment that was being made in the state, and we needed to be very thoughtful about monitoring the results of it and engaging some stakeholders in helping guide this. And so we formed a group. It's a large group, about 25, 26 people. And this represents their charge. So as you can see, they will be very busy next year reviewing the results of the first year of investments and giving us a lot more insights on how is it on the local level, how is it playing out, and what do we need to do to improve the process. We also believe that there is a great way here to actually leverage the existing resources that may be now able to be collectively bundled, if you will, to have a better impact. And I think another thing that's happening is that we're really trying very diligently with this to keep our eye on how we are engaging teachers and engaging that voice. And I would have to say that's the one thing we have more improvement to do with the advisory group. We have to figure out and cover substitutes so that we can have more teachers participate. They were challenged in coming to the events this year. Secondly, do you want to take this one? Okay.
We have an advisory group that gets together quarterly. We have approximately 11 K-12 educators, 2 who cover higher education, 3 from the community, about 6 partner organizations, and we've been very active with engaging, and we've tried to be, we're trying to be even more active in engaging our partners such as Chalkboard and OEA, COSA, ESDs. We have 13 agency folks, and that's a breakdown between the different departments of the Oregon Department of Education as well as OEIB to support
and early learning
and early learning division to really start to get a picture of bringing all of these minds together and give us a vision around where we are going to be able to bring the most bang for our buck in the with working with the network and the strategic investments in the future. So, one of the first things that we wanted to do was to figure out and be really specific about the depth and breadth of where the investments are living. So we've developed a system for looking at, you'll see all of the pinpoints. Those are where investments are across the state. We're looking at the depth of the investments by school district as well as by county. And also helping our districts now then to look at how those financial investments are coming together and they can leverage the different programs within their, across the school district and within those counties to get a really good perspective about where possible gaps lie and where we can, in the future, support more work and research going into how investments can support teaching and learning.
And this does include investments from House Bill 3232 as well, so there's a nice way to triangulate that. Okay, ready?
So what, as Hilda talked about in the last presentation, a lot of the investments have only been available to the public, to districts, for about the last 6 to 8 months. So it's really too early to know exactly what the specific impact may be. However, we are being really diligent about how we are collecting data, and in the form of baseline data, in the form of linking the goals that we're looking for into 2015, 16, 16, 17, back to some early indicators of what success might look like. So we are keeping laser focus on what our target goals are and how we, as we're staying the course, really look at what those impacts are going to be. We're going to move into what our strategies and recommendations are, but I just wanted to take just a moment to say that along with those strategies and investments, we are continuing to develop the network and linking all of this together through building a portal that allows educators to connect and collaborate within the process of implementing and developing the projects in the initiatives, and to ask that we look at and we have our projects really bring forth what are those best practices? What are those innovative practices that they are seeing come out of their projects, and how can that be used to support other districts in replication and research, so that we spread not only to where those investments were initially, but statewide?
So I'm going to walk you through this first one, and I have to applaud so many individuals in the state who have understood over the past few years how important mentoring is for new educators and new administrators. And in this biennium, you are currently funding about $9.5 million in support for new educators. And what that really comes down to is about $4,000 per teacher and about $3,800 per administrator, and it supports them having a trained mentor who works with them on a regular basis, looks at their own strategic plan for being successful, helps guide them, looks at the student work, and helps them develop their skills. However, what was rather interesting is that although we were able to fund 85% of the people who applied for grants, the job market increased, and reports show us that preliminary data that we hired 700 new teachers this year that were not part of the plans that, or the funding that was provided in August of this year. We also hired 78 new administrators. So in essence, we really were able to support around 40% of the teacher workforce and about 25% of the new administrator workforce. So we've had some deep conversations about this, and one strategy is to, first of all, make sure that we know what quality is in mentoring. And yet, secondly, and so that work has been done. There's been a terrific engagement around the state developing standards of best practice. Secondly, though, we have to look at the local context and look at the fact that perhaps the needs of administrators are a little bit different. They're mentoring, they're not a brand new educator, they're experienced, and so their needs may be very different. And then thirdly, we think that we already know that some districts are putting in-kind contributions, and we think that's a key piece here. So what we'd like to be able to suggest is that we will need a small bump in the amount of funding, but not as much as you would think, because we think that there can be some adjustments made to say, you have to meet the standards and you have to support every new teacher and administrator using those standards. So that's the strategy that we are suggesting. Secondly, well, this is pretty clear that we know that student learning outcomes are dependent on teachers. It's a little difficult to sometimes tease that out, but it is possible. You could tease out attendance and student engagement and student performance for years 1 of a teacher and years 2 and compare it to other classes. But we also know that we are looking at retention of teachers because there's a tremendous cost that we incur when we lose them. We are looking at educator satisfaction that is measured on the TEL survey. There was a whole section that looked at their support as a new teacher. And we're also looking at whether or not it's helping to retain those educators who are culturally and linguistically diverse. What we're looking at is a substantial investment would do 2 years of statewide coverage for all educators, new educators in the state. There's some new data that's coming out. It's so new that I haven't even had a chance to infuse it into this, but I'd be glad to follow up with you, that shows out of the other states that participated in the TEL survey, there's 13 states, we were at the very bottom in terms of the percentage of educators who were given new mentors, new educators given mentors. In terms of the evidence, there are so many studies here. We look to the New Teacher Center for the evidence on this, and we know that it aligns with our equity lens. In terms of teacher turnover, I'm going to say this is an estimated cost. I'm just discovered the funding formula that you can use from NCTAF to try to estimate teacher turnover, so I'm going to ask the research division to give me better data because I can't seem to get it without calling 170 plus districts to get that. We also think that we should be tracking them to see if they are moving towards tenure. That's an important indicator that mentoring makes a difference. We also know that we offered to the small and remote districts an opportunity next year to engage in an e-mentoring process. This is using 21st century technology, and we had no takers as of this week. We are still hoping that some of the small districts, knowing that they have to start at the beginning of the year, just couldn't do that this year and may take advantage of that next year so that we could figure out if that's a viable option. Yes?
You use the word tenure, and we don't have tenure.
Contracts.
Yeah, and I think it's...
It's my other world that I came from there.
We don't have...
Yes.
So...
Good catch. In terms of strategy 2, Jonna mentioned to you that we supported every school district in implementation of Common Core and the new educator effectiveness tools. This year, part of the real focus was to bring together teams to help them figure out how do you plan this work back in your district. We believe that next year that work needs to continue, but it also needs to be more regionalized and localized. It's not the state coming in and saying, this is how you do it, but it's saying to the districts, you now have your plan, you've had that peer-reviewed process that gave you feedback on your plan, and now you need to be able to work together with local resources as well as combine consortiums or regions to better serve the needs. So if I'm a district that has opportunities to offer some things for my teachers, I may be partnering in ways that I wasn't doing this year. So that's really a focus of that. And again, looking at how did every district who participated in the TEL look at the results of what teachers said about professional development, and is their plan reflecting changes that need to happen in that area?
Can I just also add with that piece that it helps to get at the gaps where districts who don't have those grant writers and who may not have been able to pull together the necessary groups to write for a strategic initiative are able now then to get some support in coming together and leverage funds in their region.
We also know that there are annual data that should be continuing. I actually should have put here by every 2-year data because the TEL survey is not recommended to be given every year. However, there's been some conversations, and we're looking at results from 2 districts that experimented with the tripod survey, which it comes out of Harvard, and it is one of the best respected tools to actually talk to students about what's happening for their learning. How is the teacher meeting up my needs? And so we may want to look at whether or not we could pilot that in some additional districts. In terms of theory of action, I think you saw this as you read through it. I won't spend time on it except that there is a direct relationship to the investment in teacher professional development and the effects for students. I'm going to skip over this given time. I know you read this. There are several other things that I think we need to consider, and that is, and I referenced a very interesting study that showed that the most significant changes in math and science pedagogy came about not as a result of a one-day workshop, came about as a result of 6 months of probably 90+ hours of teacher engagement. Not all of that is at a workshop. It's going back and examining my work, collaborating with others. And so until we get to a point where we've increased the amount of time that teachers are supported to work with each other and with their own practices, you won't see much change. That's a significant finding that's coming out throughout the nation. We also know that the network that Jonna referenced will maximize and perhaps bring some new strategies using 21st century tools. When I go do something on the internet now, I go to the internet for training on how to do it. It's just-in-time training. That's how I learn. And a lot of educators want to keep going back and accessing materials to support their learning, so we need to provide that. We also know that our external providers are very nimble and sometimes able to be more responsive in fine-tuning something to meet the needs of rural communities or a particular population. Third strategy here, you have already reviewed results from the both class projects, also the teacher incentive funded projects, the chalkboard has developed, and these are all about engaging educators to really look at professional development in conjunction with the administrators and look at new ways of developing leadership roles, compensation, etc. So we believe that there is a benefit in continuing this. I think you will hear later from some public testimony on the direct impact on student achievement, so I'm going to leave that for public testimony. But there are a number of outcomes that this directly relates to, and we have seen very promising results to date. I think one of the key things I would say here is that this is built on a model of readiness with a design process first before you fund implementation, because without that readiness, it's not successful. I'm going to move to strategy 4. You invested through this biennium in educator preparation, which was looking at Teach Oregon projects, as well as some initiatives that we think now are drawing to a close. We are now moving with implementation on what's known as EdTPA, the Teacher Performance Assessment. You help fund support for that. That will continue through July 15. We think at that point you won't need to do that anymore. However, where we think that those funds need to be reallocated is around the recruitment and retention projects that I mentioned earlier, as well as maintenance of the statewide recruitment website. Right now, I just challenge you, when you're bored next, go Google becoming a teacher in Oregon. I hate to tell you what you'll find, it's all over the map. We need a state authorized website that is informative, accurate, kept up to date, and is engaging for different groups of students. 17-year-olds, career changers, instructional assistants, people with different languages. We don't have it right now, but that will be something we'll share with you in December. Strategy 4, this simply shows you the monitoring that we would be doing that is already underway. And I'm going to move to strategy 5 since I am running over time. The last piece here is really looking at culturally responsive teaching pedagogy and practices. I think that Hannah's point that some educators, if they're in a minority, they feel kind of uncomfortable sometimes in an environment that doesn't perhaps think and act sensitively to their needs. The same thing is true for teaching. And I know as an educator that's been in this for decades, every single day I learn something new about what I say, what I do, my behaviors, my intentions, and how I can improve those as I think about really responding to everyone's needs. And so that work is definitely not achieved yet. We would say that you still need to invest in that. And these are the outcomes that you would be monitoring. This also may be where we look at the tripod survey, because students will tell us if educators are reaching them, supporting them, engaging them, talking with their families, and that's probably a better monitor than if we just ask teachers. Yeah. So I'm going to close with that and see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much.
So the states that have done the TEL survey, how many have crossed over and done the tripod? Because I'm intrigued.
That I don't have, but boy, is that a great question, and I know we will find that out for you.
And there's a really great webinar that I just watched last night, actually, from the Teacher Center around
New Teacher Center?
The cost of
Yes.
losing attrition in education. And it's,
We'll talk offline so you can make sure I get that one. Thank you.
Okay, Sing. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good job on time.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for
you. That's right.
Yeah, very good.
That's why my parents
Okay.
said I talk too much, right?
Whitney, you have a little.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna spend a couple minutes kind of, maybe I'll move around, but.
Maybe I could, as Whitney's coming forward, your public testimony people, get ready, please, and decide on who's going to speak for chalkboard.
So I'll
Okay.
just spend just a couple minutes kind of trying to knit together what we've heard and talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing with what we've heard in the coming month, so that we can make a little context. I think the comments and questions that came up were very, obviously, those of us on the staff side know the process kind of inside and out, and those of you on the subcommittee sometimes are left wondering how things are going to fit together. So So you've heard just a rash of presentations, obviously, from different agencies, as well as from other councils and kind of some less formalized groups, such as the one you just heard from the Network for Quality Teaching and Learning. And what we would like to do is at the next meeting, when we bring you all together, we will have developed a matrix that will have pre-filled in information about here were the different presentations that came to you, the different strategies that were recommended, some sense of whether these are short-term or long-term investments, some sense of what outcomes they're aimed at addressing, some sense of a few other questions that will relate to the equity lens, and we'll kind of work through it as a group. And we'll have a binder for you, so you'll have all these different presentations there if we need to refer back to them, but we're really going to spend the time talking through sort of how these all fit together. And in many cases, as you mentioned, Ron, there are places where there were presentations that came from different groups that really should be melded together, and I think the job of the staff before we bring them to you is to find those alignments and kind of point them out to you, and you'll see other places where you think that, you know, there could be things that move together, and then we'll get some sense of a prioritization. So that'll be the first work session. We will then bring that to the OEIB full board at its August 12th retreat.
So when's the first thing?
August 6th.
That's our committee?
Yep.
Yeah.
Is that on the calendar
With
already?
equity it is.
Yes.
August 6th, 8.
Ooh.
30.
Ew. Ew. Don't say ew.
August 6th.
It's, I believe
That's
it's,
in the
is that a
morning.
Tuesday in the morning? Is that right?
Yes.
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Okay.
It's
Yep,
at
I do
Northwest
have
Health. We're meeting with the other group.
Right,
Yes.
with the equity and
Yes.
And
Yes.
where is that, Northwest Health?
Northwest Health Foundation is in the Philanthropy Building on Second. Second and Cooch. Second and, I think that's right.
Will we have food there then?
Will we have food? I don't know. Seth will do that.
Seth will bake.
Seth is baking. Yes, we will have coffee, which we don't have today.
2 hours.
But,
Yes.
but is the format of that, I mean, what we've had is presentations.
Mm-hmm.
And although people have used words like discuss and debate, there hasn't been any time to discuss or debate.
Right, exactly.
And so if all we're doing is knitting together things that other people have recommended, I'm not sure why we need to meet. Is there absolutely a chance for us to say, I don't actually agree with that recommendation?
Yes.
I'd like to see it different?
Yes, no, so I will have, Peter and I will have worked out a way of kind of organizing them for you so that you're not looking through, you know, a binder, but that then we will very much be spending the time looking at them and having you all give your voice to what, you know, this resonated, this was really lacking information, or I get this strategy, but it doesn't seem like a high priority, or how did this fit in with this, or, I mean, that kind of engaged discussion, I think, is what we're really hoping for.
And then the related question is, everybody talks about, well, they were told they had to prioritize, you know, we can't do everything. But this, for whatever reason, refusal to talk about numbers.
Yes.
I don't know how we can have a sensible
Right.
discussion if we don't start introducing numbers into it.
Right. So, and everyone turns to me, as you notice, and blames me, but really we should be turning to Danny and the governor and blaming them.
I don't know what we're talking about. What, you know, if you give me $1 billion, I got all kinds of priorities. You tell me
Right,
we got
right.
zero money, why are we wasting our time?
So, and
a
what,
discussion that doesn't have any notion of numbers, to me, is kind of an intellectual exercise that doesn't provide much value.
Or, another way to look at it is that by sort of focusing in on like the concept, it gives the governor a better sense of sort of where your priorities lay, and that he and George will have to do the math that you don't have to do.
Yeah, but if we take, but that's not that way. So we talk about the first presentation on, you know, financial aid for how we're going to apply it to higher education. Well, you know, we could spend $1 billion on that, probably would, really, $1 billion on it, and not meet.
700, at least, 700 million. At least,
700
right?
million, you know, we're going to do that. Then we can talk about the fact that with STEM education, we have all these needs, you know, to dramatically increase and the things we need to do there. We can go through each of the presentations. They add up to a number way, way beyond anything that's realistic. I think that the legislature is going to fund. And so to say, I don't know what he wants to say. Yeah, I think we ought to do more higher education funding for kids. We ought to have more scholarships, more financial aid to let more kids go to higher education. I think we ought to do more for Spanish-speaking third graders. I think we have all those things. But how do I pick between Spanish-speaking third graders and the STEM program and more financial aid? I don't know how to pick between them if I don't have any idea what the magnitude of cost is. That's a meaningless thing to discuss.
Well, so I think that, so I don't think it has to be a meaningless exercise. I think what's helpful in informing the governor's budget is have a conversation as in, that's sort of, assume funding is no option. What's the right thing to do?
Funding is no option?
Assume that, yeah. I mean, as a way to sort of get down to the eventual conversation that we have to have about trade-offs, right? So I think it's like, okay, if we didn't have funding constraints, what's the right thing to do? Then if we did have to then we will have funding constraints, let me be clear. Then is it a scale, do we do everything with a small scale, or do we then have a conversation about trade-offs? And I think that's
if you tell me third grade Spanish reading program costs $100 million, or whatever it costs, that to me then in your thing says I have to find $100 million to cut somewhere else in a zero budget scenario. So I still need to know that it's a $100 million program, that we're going to have to find $100 million offset somewhere else if that's our priority.
Would you, well, so I guess where I go, would you feel comfortable if we sort of said like, okay, what if we come up with some like scenarios and then having the conversation with what could likely be one of several scenarios that happen with the budget? Would that feel meaningless?
Well, to me, if we're being asked to make priorities, either within a zero-sum budget, which I understand, or with some limited add to it, we still have to have some sense of what we're spending. I mean, it's a spending game. If all we're doing is not spending any money and it's about educational priorities, which teaching methodology teaches third graders better than what other teaching methodology? We're the wrong committee for that. I don't know the answer to that, other than Hannah may, but I don't know the answers to that. So we're the education investment board. And so we're not here to talk about which reading approach is the right reading approach. We're here to talk about, is funding third grade reading a higher priority than funding something else? And I don't know how to answer that question if I don't know, if we could fund all third grade reading for $1 million, I'd say put that at the top of the list. What a great investment. If it cost $1 billion, well, gosh, I don't know where we're going to cut $1 billion. That's a pretty tough thing to do.
So is the issue, Ron, that you don't know the cost per outcome, or is the issue that you don't know how much the program costs?
Well, it's
how much available.
It's
or what's available. I mean,
if all we're doing is a wish list of what things would be nice to have if money were no object, then I'll just say all of them. They all sounded pretty good to me. If we're being asked to rank them in some priority way, then we need some sense, because ranking the $1 million thing and the $900 million thing, you can't just throw them in like they're equals. They're not equals.
And so you're saying that the highest priority lens that you're going to do is looking at cost effectiveness?
I want bang for the buck. And so if we're talking about, we have...
And is that across the committee, the bang for the buck is the...
Duncan, maybe you,
so
we struggled, Ron, with this same exact conundrum last cycle, and the folks that came together on the education funding team did not deal in dollars. That is the governor still retains a lot of discretion around the final budget, and so maybe Duncan, you can speak to.
The only thing is, I we have to go back. I have to remember. I'm not ready to suggesting, but we did know the dollars. I mean, we knew what we were talking about in terms of the amount being proposed. I mean, so I think...
Ballparkish?
What's that?
Just a
no, we knew the
ballpark
budget. We had the budget sitting in front of us, so that obviously helped. So I don't want to try to make a recommendation.
So maybe we can, together with staff, we can come up with some scenarios that are informative enough where it's not meaningless, but that they may not be the true and actual numbers, but they can give at least a flavor of the types of trade-offs that you would have to make, looking at cost effectiveness and the sort of like scalability. Would that feel less hollow?
Well, it does. I just think absent a discussion about is third grade reading programs for Spanish-speaking kids important? Yes, that's important. How do I rank it relative to other priorities? I I don't know, unless I know what those other priorities are and what trade-offs have to be made. I mean,
Right.
we have to have no STEM education if we're going to have third grade Spanish reading. I mean, I don't know how to make those trade-offs if we don't have some sense of what's involved.
Right. Well, in part, the sort of format that we're thinking of putting together helps by walking through some questions around in terms of, is this short-term, is it long-term? I mean, I think in general, through that policy paper that we did in the beginning, there were some theories that were described, right? We think that last time there was too many different focuses. So in part, you know, if this group were to say all these are important, the truth is you've already made a statement that actually we kind of think the state needs to focus in some areas. And so there are some sort of guiding principles that I think can at least help, not to create a numbered list of priorities, but to really say, all right, these things seem to be really critically important at this time. These things we can't, you know, they're important, but we can't tell relative to, you know, dollars whether or not. So I do think that this committee can really get to some important deliberations without putting together an actual budget.
Okay.
I think I share, I mean, I've sat on the subcommittee the last go-around, and we continue to, you know, we had some great presentations. I mean, there's no doubt a lot of the things that have been brought forward can move the dial. But we keep pretending that we've got this aspirational goal of 40-40-20, and we keep expecting that we're going to get there by moving money around. The TEL survey is very clear. The information we have, that we have the second largest class size. The TEL survey says the learning conditions of our students are not appropriate, but yet we think we can just move it around, and that we're not going to have to do what we all know we have to do, I hope, which is invest in public education and the students that we have. So, I mean, I'm happy to sit and have the conversation about the priorities and looking at what we do, but at some point, we've got to stand up and say, what we have is not adequate to provide a learning condition for each and every student, especially our students of color and our students living in poverty. And until we address it, 40-40-20 is not just an aspirational goal, it is out of reach for all of us. So I appreciate all of the presentations, and I will engage and give you my very best thinking. But at some point, this committee has got to say, you know what? We need to look at the revenue structure. We need to do something different. So I'm ready for that conversation whenever the group is.
And I would just encourage everyone that, you know, respectfully, Hannah, it's not either or, it's probably both.
Well, but we've been talking about move the money around for so long, and our students are suffering, but yet we still set this goal out and we don't address the real issue. Is it we don't have what we have.
We haven't actually moved any of the money around, not very much.
Oh, we have. We're spending a whole lot of money on high-stakes standardized tests that doesn't need to be spent, but we continue to do it because we're told to do it by the feds. There are a lot of people who are ready to do things differently.
Well, I think in part I think, as Danny said, I think this subcommittee can make the recommendation around increased investment at all levels of education, which has been made, but we're not a revenue committee. And so there is within the scope of this subcommittee, it's really around helping the governor do the best he can with the
And this is going to be a joint meeting with equity and partnerships, and it starts at 8:30, and can we be done in 2 hours?
Yep.
For sure. If there's
We're having a long meeting, and then what happens in the other meeting?
Yes, thank you,
Because
Duncan.
that's the big one, we got a full day.
So then
Yeah.
the full board meets on August 12th. And 2 hours of that meeting is devoted to bringing the thinking from the work session on the 6th to the full board and helping sort of begin to share that with them. Then there's another work session scheduled for the 24th.
But the full board's not going to have input. Will they have input then at that time?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes. Again, we want to set it up so that it's not a recreation of, this subcommittee has dug in and heard a lot of information that the full board won't. And so the hope is that we can present something, to the full board that is not gives them the opportunity to give input and ask questions and steer your thinking. But obviously, we're not going to have time to go through the process that you all just went through, which is much deeper and more involved. And then there's a final work session. I believe it's the 24th of August, 22nd.
21st?
I see one on an old schedule that's 21st, but I'm not sure if it's, it's out.
And at that point
Is that
would
full
be,
board or just this
no,
one?
just the subcommittee, just
I have
the
the
subcommittee.
21st.
I have the 21st too,
Okay.
9 o'clock?
9 to 11 at
Here.
I have
Yeah,
9
here.
to-
here.
9 to 11.
We might need to extend
We
that.
should have a long, I mean,
I agree. And that would be where some final guidance is given from you all to the staff so that we can write up some recommendations that would then be presented to the full board on the 9th of September. And that is when I will say goodbye to you all.
So
Your swan song. right?
So the 12th and the 21, how are they different then?
Whole board on the 12th, 21st is just.
Right, but I mean, for far as us presenting and stuff, we're still not going to come to any conclusions, or are we going to put a bow around it on the 21st?
Put a bow around it on the 21st.
Okay.
I like that
Tie yellow ribbon.
phraseology.
Okay? We
Yes.
still haven't answered Ron's question
So,
or
I mean, one
input. still.
observation about process, what I've heard, and I think this is, we just to consolidate and build some of the game. I think what we have now with Nancy and the team is probably 6 to 8 critical outcomes that this budget, both the budget, the formulas plus policy, could actually move Oregon forward. And I'm just going to, third grade reading was clearly one of them. I think we're hearing an English language learning, more access, in particular, high school completion. I mean, through the ninth, and through the proposals that Rob has made, and I think we can tie that to some of the HEC work. Access and affordability, STEM and CTE. If we can call out those critical outcomes and say these are the investments that we would recommend, and changes in policy. So it's a combination of investment, as Hannah says, and productivity improvements through policy changes. Then I think you have a pretty compelling story to tell. Again, I'm not hitting all the outcomes, but there are a couple, like teacher professional development is clearly another one we just heard. So you can, but I think as I've listened to Nancy, I think she's called them out, and then I think we have I think we could put a good story. And I'm sort of with, at some point we do have to get numbers associated with these, so there is adequately funded. And I don't know. I mean, I know you're not looking for the detailed numbers, but it would be worth having the conversation at a sort of global level. Okay, what would this take? And I think this could be a really powerful budget presentation because again, I keep thinking it's got to tie the outcomes, the funding, and the policy in one place around critical outcomes that we're trying to drive with a sense of strategy. And we're not going to get it all done in the next 2 years, but we can make. I think what I've heard is we could really move the dials in the next 2 years if we get this right.
Nancy?
Yeah, Whitney and I were talking about when we come back to you, we would place these critical ones on the pathway, because this isn't only about isolated investments, it's about one leveraging the other.
Yes.
So third grade reading leverages
Right.
graduation.
Right.
And without it, it's going to be 4
Right.
times
Right.
More
that it
expensive.
gives graduate. So we're going to show on the pathway not only individual investments, but how we think they're the key leverage points.
Great.
Okay. Okay, Whitney?
Thank you.
Okay, good. Dave Porter and then Sue Pellick, chalkboard. Okay, Seth, you're the bad cop. Since I'm on the road here in a little bit. Yes, fire away. Dave, good.
Okay, my name is Dave Porter. Thank you, Chair Whitnell and members of the committee. I have reviewed the online materials and there's written stuff that I'm going to sort of read. I have reviewed the online materials for this meeting and have the following 2 suggestions. 1, that the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission's proposal for outcome-based allocation formulas include significant additional funding weights for School of Education that graduate students with the skills and credentials to be dual language immersion teachers in Oregon. 2, that related to the OEIB Best Practices in Student Transition Subcommittee Strategy 2, etc., additional tuition and stipends be targeted to students preparing to become dual language Spanish dual language immersion teachers. There is currently a shortage of Spanish dual language immersion teachers across Oregon. Without significantly more Spanish dual language immersion teachers, Oregon will be unable to close the achievement and graduation gaps for Hispanics, and many English native students will remain monolingual without their desired and needed Spanish bilingual skills. Oregon should not let this happen. Last week, the Portland Public Schools dual language immersion staff told me that several new elementary level Spanish bilingual immersion teacher positions remain unfilled. PPS staff has already made recruiting trips to places like Texas and New Mexico. The current shortage is real. According to my suggested dual language immersion expansion plan, Appendix X there, for Portland Public Schools, they will need 82 additional Spanish dual language immersion K-5 elementary teachers over the next 10 years. There is a need for a larger number of Spanish dual language immersion teachers in Oregon outside of Portland Public Schools. For example, Oregon currently has 11 school districts, each with more than 1,000 Hispanic students and no Spanish dual language immersion program. See Appendix B. And within those 11 school districts, there are 15 schools, each with a majority of Hispanic students and no dual language immersion program. See Appendix C. Plus other school districts with existing immersion programs need to expand. Long-term, much more needs to be done to reshape hiring prospects for Spanish dual language immersion teachers. The existing Oregon teacher credentialing and teacher higher education systems are outdated. They are failing us. They do not and probably will not produce the dual language immersion teachers or teachers of color that Oregon needs. Currently, both the Teacher Standards and Practices Commission and the Oregon System of Higher Education are more obstacles than aids to developing a 21st century education system. Both the teacher credentialing and the teacher education higher education system need substantial rethinking and reshaping. I do not know if, how, or when this might happen, nor do I even have a clear vision of what reforms are needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, Sue?
Hello, nice to see you all. I am Sue Hildick with the Chalkboard Project, and we're really here to say amen to what Hilda presented around the network. Through the network, you are creating a system at the state level to support educators in the classroom. And we really feel like those supports strengthen classroom instruction, which we know is the #1 in-school factor affecting what kids learn. So we want you to stay the course. And I just want to tick through what some of those investments are. Obviously, the one we're closest to is the School District Collaboration Fund, and we now have 40% of the children in Oregon in a district in that program. And that's really about changing the culture so that practitioners are leading the conversation about teaching and learning in those districts. We're seeing strong achievement gains across the board. We're seeing gaps close, particularly the poverty gaps. We can tell you more about that at any time that you want, but it's really good news. And maybe most importantly, teacher attitudes are shifting in those districts as teachers feel like they have ownership and leadership in the decisions that are made around teaching and learning. Secondly, expansion of the mentoring program was a wonderful idea. We'd love to see every new teacher have a mentor. I think we know that that is important for retention and it's important for quality in the early years in the classroom. Third, we're working hard on evaluation across the state. Senate Bill 290 created the frame, let me say, but we have to fill in that frame really robustly, and we need to support the profession to do that. And a lot of good work's happened this year, but frankly, it's going to take several years of support to see that really work, and that could impact every child in this state. If we do performance evaluation as a continuous improvement process with professionals, we're going to get much better results. Fourth piece would be transforming teacher preparation. You've heard about Teach Oregon. We're working on that. That is very hard work to bring higher ed and K-12 into a common conversation about what is needed from our teacher candidates. It's a very different conversation, but the work is going well. Several of those things have been piloted now by the foundation supporters in the state and are scaling with state funds. And that's just a side point I want to mention as you look about limited dollars, leveraging our private supporters to really take the risk, frankly, do the hard work on the ground, and then bring it to the state sort of tested and vetted and ready to be scaled, I think is an important partnership between the work you're doing here and philanthropy in the state. And the last thing is we have a new venture that we are very excited around, school leadership, and how do we train principals to be high impact around quality instruction. How do we have adaptive leaders who have emotional intelligence and who can really lead out in the field? And not only are we going to need those folks for turnaround schools, but we need them everywhere. And so we're very excited to see that stand up, and I think that has a place in the network in the future.
Thanks, Sue. Okay, Frank Cabello. Oh, right, okay.
Hi.
You're not speaking for a chalkboard project, you're an old administrator now.
Correct.
I was told you were old, and you know that old to me, but it's all right.
I didn't say old. I don't know where that word came
Oh, okay. Former, that's former.
Well, good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Although I'm officially now with Chalkboard, I'd like to speak of my experiences as a former assistant superintendent, school principal, and teacher in Oregon. The work of the network and the proposals before you are building a continuum of support for teachers and administrators who are doing the work. The proposals before you are looking at beginning with preparation through early career mentoring and then developing career ladders for teachers so that they have options to take on leadership roles and contribute without necessarily leaving the classroom to become an administrator, and that's critical to the work. As a district leader, I led our district work around class and TIF for the last 4 years. It predated Senate Bill 290 and some of these reforms. And I saw the power firsthand of collaboration, of when you invite teachers into the room and talk about and look at what happens if we rethink what professional development means to make it meaningful. What happens if we rethink teacher evaluation? And teacher evaluation done right is 99% feedback and support. That's the key. And teachers want that feedback, I believe. They want leaders in their schools who can support the work that they're doing. I led an elementary school for 7 years, about 300 kids a year. Every year, kids left my school learning to read. And I was proud of that. In 7 years, I never taught a single student to read as the principal. I supported the people doing the work. That's critical. And what the network is trying to do is scale up that support statewide. And I believe it's the right work. I believe it empowers teachers, and when we empower teachers and building principals and district leaders, get them on the same page, then we're making good progress. So I'll close with just saying that I believe this work is valuable. It's really, and look forward to continuing to work with the network and the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. What school district were you?
Greater Albany.
Okay.
Can I just?
Yes.
I had the privilege of working with Frank on several occasions, and I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done. You've really walked the walk. Thank you for that.
Good afternoon, Toya Fick with Stand for Children. Thanks so much for allowing us to talk today. I'm here on behalf of Stand, Chalkboard, Adelante Mujeres, and the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, also known as APANO, to testify in support of the ODE proposal to change how we fund ELL programs. The ODE came before you a couple of months ago, presented a few things, particularly on looking at how we allocate funding for ELL, so I wanted to speak in support of that. Currently, the state spends about $160 million a year on ELL programs, and the graduation rate is about 49%. So clearly something has to change for those students. This new proposal will cost you nothing. To answer your question, it will cost nothing. It reallocates resources in a way that increases accountability for spending, funds for outcomes, and incentivizes successful exiting of students from these ELL programs. They showed you a lot of data. The one I love to talk about is when kids exit ELL programs before high school, they have a greater graduation rate than even my kid, who's a native English speaker. That is amazing, and we need to make sure that we're funding those kind of things. You have an unprecedented opportunity to do something different for ELL kids in the state, and we hope that you take advantage of it. Happy to provide support for you to do that through the legislature and answer any questions you may have on that. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Tim. Very good. Donna Cohen?
Hi. My name is Donna Cohen. I was a technology education teacher, and I have a master's in voc ed administration. In regard to jobs, I want to add trades to jobs. I don't think we should forget about them. And in fact, for many students, the only way they're going to get any exposure to using tools is in a STEM workspace. Hopefully, this is my next point. I'm very concerned about the focus of STEM in secondary schools, or what we're planning. It seems to be only geared to high-tech STEM learning experiences. You know, I was a teacher a while back in tech ed. There was disrespect at that time for hands-on learning. I fear that I see the same thing happening now. But STEM is project-based, and in order to do projects, you need to use a very wide variety of technologies, not just high-tech. You know, you need computers, oscilloscopes, drill presses, CNC metal milling machines, 3D printers, welding equipment. I can go on and on and on and on. You're not going to have a kid be able to build a small electric vehicle or a wind turbine or anything that, you know, can be a wonderful, creative, applying science and math project if all they have is a laser printer and a 3D printer and you know, just the high-tech machines. That's not how it works. I could show you pictures of a machine shop in my community where, as the fellow who runs it says, we could never run the shop without both types of equipment. We have a CNC lathe. Next to it is a non-CNC lathe. They need both. Next to the CNC lathe is a whole board filled with hand tools. What are the hand tools for? You have to set up the CNC lathe. So I get the feeling sometimes that people think all we have to do is push buttons. You know, whether it's on the computer or on the CNC machine, whatever. That's not reality. So I'm concerned about that. And although I didn't come here for this next reason, it's relevant and maybe you can help. But right now in Portland, my local high school is being redesigned, and they are doing the STEM area in the exact opposite way of all of the things that we set for STEM goals. They are literally splitting the STEM workspace into a high-tech space, and in another part of the school, a non-high-tech workspace.
You have 10 minutes back.
Yeah. Now? Okay. Well, anyways, if you guys could help us with that, it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a 1970s school, and it would be very, very unfortunate for the community. Thank you very much.
And what high school is that?
Roosevelt High School. And we've been fighting this. They had nobody with a tech background or engineering background involved. They didn't realize what they were doing, and now they seem to have dug a hole that they...
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Sloan, is that, who's, can't read this handwriting here.
Dr. Dapple.
Dapple. Okay. Yeah. Jim Anderson? Jim Anderson? Jim Anderson with the penmanship.
You remember that?
I remember that, especially being mine's so lousy.
I'm an old retired engineer and who specialized a lot in quality control management and auditing. And I'd like to see more concentration on the student. We say that every child can be taught, And I hope that means every child can reach grade level. And I'm on the site council at King's School, and only a third of our kids are reaching grade level at all the way from kindergarten to 8th grade. And we need to concentrate on how the child can be taught rather than looking at things in total. We need to get the techniques. Like we used to have tutoring in the school, within the school. And people tell me it was pretty effective in getting a child caught up to date. But we have to focus on if the child is coming in not ready for school, as Dr. Golden so well pointed out. We need to do something about getting that child ready for school. I mean, in quality control, if it's something that's dealing with money, I made sure that our raw material was coming in the proper quality. But since it's just children, we aren't doing the same thing that we do in money, in commerce. So I would like to advocate for the child.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, any comments from the board? We're adjourned.